For joining us. As Heidi said, we are recording, so please just bear that in mind if you share any information or anything. So just to introduce myself, I'm Callum. I'm the Sport Welfare Officer for Get Berkshire Active. I'm joined this evening with Yvette, who is my equivalent in Berkshire for LEAP, and also Heidi. Did I say? Thank you. I'm Berkshire, you're Buckinghamshire, LEAP, and also Heidi in Oxfordshire. So they'll introduce themselves shortly, but I'm just going to go over a few overview of the session today, and then we'll get going. Yvette is going to go over what is an active partnership, just in case any of you aren't familiar. We're also going to introduce the role of the sports welfare officers, which is what we all are, so how we can support you. And then if she can join us, we should have Fiona, the Lado, joining us to go over the role of what she does. And then also some practical advice for your club further down the line at the end of the presentation. There will also be an opportunity for questions, discussions, all that sort of thing. So a little bit of housekeeping. Obviously the session's recorded. Please stay muted just to keep background noise to a minimum, and use the chat or raise your hands if you have any questions. Also worth noting that this is a safe space, so and it's confidential, so feel free to share things. Obviously, probably don't put in identifying information if you are going to speak about things, but equally we can support, confidentiality. We're not going to share any of this with people unnecessarily. So what we thought might be quite nice if everyone could put into the chat their name and the organisation they come for, and also what county they are in. That would be really helpful for us, because obviously we all operate in different counties. So it'd be really helpful if we could know who's from which county, and therefore who can support you the most. Right, so that's everything from me. I'm now going to hand over to Yvette, who I hope can see the correct slide, and she's going to take you through the role of what an active partnership is.
Yep, so this won't take very long. One of the things that surprised me when I came into post was the number of clubs and club welfare officers I spoke to who didn't actually know what an active partnership was or what we do. So thought it'd be really useful just to spend a couple of minutes talking about the active partnerships. So across the country, there are 43 active partnerships. We're all based in the different counties. So I can hear all the clicking as people are joining. So we're all based in the different counties. So there's 43 of us. So the whole of England is covered. And actually, we're there to try and make physical activity and sport accessible for everyone, to look at what the barriers are to physical activity and to try and work with stakeholders to overcome those barriers so that everybody has access to some kind of physical activity, whether that's organised sport or it's just taking yourself out for a run. All of the evidence is that by being much more active, we're actually transforming our lives and our communities. There's been a recent study around mental health and physical activity and the impact that physical activity has on those who are going through talking therapies. And I think there is going to be actually a link between talking therapies and physical activity. So people will now be encouraged to get out, be more active, and the impact of that on their mental health hopefully will be very, very positive. So the active partnerships take a place-based approach. And like I said earlier, it's about breaking down those barriers that prevent people from being active. The active partnerships are also part of the Uniting the Movement strategy, which is hoping to transform lives and communities. And part of the Uniting the Movement is championing the life-changing impact of sport. And I think I hope we've all been inspired, having watched the Olympics and the Paralympics, to see, the amazing things that people can do. So we're all going to try and work together and we're looking to recover and reinvent after the COVID pandemic. We're looking at connecting communities and looking at positive experiences for children and young people. As I talked briefly around that kind of health and well-being, so connecting the two and looking at active environments. Has anyone got any questions? You can put your hand up, you can unmute your mic. No? Okay. So the next slide. Ooh. IT is not my thing, as anyone who's works with me will tell you. So out of the active partnerships, there is now a network of sport welfare officers. These are funded by Sport England. And I think very recently we've just had national coverage. So everyone, every club in the country should now have access to a sports welfare officer. So the Sports Welfare Officer Network came out of the White Review, which I'm hoping most of you will have heard of, looking particularly at gymnastics, but actually the implications of the White Review is much, much wider. So across the country, there will be 63 of us. Some counties, some active partnerships will have 2 sports welfare officers. London has 5. But across the BOB network, so that's Berkshire, Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire, we all have just one. So that's Heidi, Callum and I. We have 2 national officers who support the work, and we are all looking to contribute towards the Uniting the Movement strategy. We're funded by Sport England, and we're all still quite new in post. I mean, I think the newest kind of sports welfare officers have only started a couple of weeks ago, whereas other sports welfare officers have been in post since October, November last year. Has anyone got any questions about the sports welfare officers? So one of the things that we're looking to do is to particularly support clubs and club welfare officers around that kind of safeguarding and welfare in clubs. And one of the ways that we've chosen to do this, and us have other sports welfare officers, is through forums to bring people together to share learning, to support each other. Because I think sometimes the club welfare officer role can be quite isolating, and sometimes you may feel that you're dealing with issues on your own. And this is our attempt to try and bring club welfare officers together, so you know that you're not alone, that others are perhaps dealing with the same issues as you, and perhaps have solutions to the issues that you have. So please feel free, in the chat, to talk to each other, to share what's going on. Obviously, as Callum said, to be careful about not giving out any confidential information. And one of the things we're really working hard at is to change the culture of clubs. So along with the I think I might have another slide. So along with the CPSU, the Ancraft Trust, Sport England, the active partnerships, we're all trying to work together to build a culture of good safeguarding and good welfare. I think at the moment there has been we have kind of like a compliance culture, and what we really want to do is to move that from that tick box, yes, we've got a safeguarding policy, yes, we look after the welfare of our participants, yes, we encourage diversity, to actually looking at how we can embed all of that and celebrate safeguarding welfare and diversity within our clubs. Does anyone have any questions? No? So I'm going to, I think, sorry, I've lost the ability to change the slides. So I'm not sure what's going on there. There. Okay, so what we can do for you is we can support the NGBs. We are trying to come up with some training offers. Goodness, it's been a long day. We can help support you with best practice policies. We're trying to build up a network that's supportive and sharing. We can come to your clubs, but we obviously can't come to every club. And as I was talking about around building that kind of change from compliance to culture. But what we don't do is manage safeguarding concerns. We can support you to signpost you and so you know where to go. And part of that is signposting to the Lado. So the NGBs are very keen that if you do need to access the Lado, that you go through the NGB to do so. And if you're not sure what the Lado is, it's a local authority designated officer. And I'm hoping, because I've waffled for quite a bit, that Fiona...
I'm here.
Fiona is here now, yes.
I didn't see you pop
Sorry,
up. I'm just going to keep talking.
It's fine. It's fine. No, I'm so sorry. I had to use a different email address, and it finally let me in. So I didn't like my first one.
Okay, then I
So
am going
apologies
to
for that.
hand back to Callum, who is going to do the introduction to Fiona. So.
Thank you very much. Yes, minor panic averted as we now have Fiona.
Sorry.
We're all frantically typing away in the background. So apologies, everyone, if we weren't as smooth as we would have liked. Yes, so we've got Fiona who's joining us today, very kindly agreed to come and give a few moments of her time. And she's what's called as a LADO, a local authority designated officer. Yes, I think that's... you're here to introduce yourself, so why not hand over to you? If we have any questions for Fiona, just pop them in the chat and we'll ask them at the end of her time. Fiona, if you just ask me to move on to the next slide, I can do that too.
Thank you, Callum. Thanks so much.
No worries.
Yeah. And yeah, thanks for your time this evening. I won't talk at you too much, I hope, but just wanted to give you a bit of an idea of what is a LADO and what does a LADO do. So, and it's very much going to be around, your role as people working or volunteering in sports clubs and sports groups with children and young people. Someone can't see any slides. I can see it on my screen. Maybe if other people are struggling, they could say.
Someone else is saying they can see them.
I think a lot of people can, but maybe some can't. But I mean, these, they can be. If you want, you can send them out. Obviously, Callum, it's not not a lot in there, but because it's a short talk, but it'll give you an idea of where you can go to find more information if you need it.
Absolutely. We are also recording the session, so if people so I've got a lot of people saying they can see. It's only one person that can't see them, so apologies for that. I'm not sure why that's the case, but yes, we can send them out afterwards, as you say, and we're also recording, so hopefully that should cover those bases.
I've just seen a hand up as well. Oh, it's gone down. Okay. So yes, so my name's Fiona Goussard, and I'm qualified social worker by practice. I qualified too many years ago, so I'm not telling you how many years ago. But I've worked in children's services all the time. I've been a social worker, and I've been in referral and assessment teams, mainly doing assessments and front end work, if you like, before going on to be a manager of a family centre, and then going off to be a child protection conference chair and an independent reviewing officer for children who are in care, children in care looked after. And about 10 years ago, I started the role of LADO in a different authority, and then I've come over here in 2018. So I've got quite a lot of experience, but I must say there's always something new that comes along and makes me scratch my head and wonder what to do and get some advice, because it's always safeguarding children. There's never easy answers, but so that's a bit about me. So just also a word of caution, I think there are people from different authorities on the call tonight. So obviously I work in West Berkshire, so some of the ways that we do it, the process might be slightly different in each authority, but the procedures that we work to are pretty much the same. So I think that will hopefully be similar for all of you. Next slide, please, Callum. So this is just a pointer of what guidance and legislation covers the role of the LADO or local authority designated officer and managing allegations against people who work or volunteer in a position of trust with children. So the Children's Act 2004 places a duty on all organisations that provide any services for children to safeguard children. In fact, we all have a duty to play our part and play our role to keep children safe. But if you've got an organisation that volunteers or works with children, you have additional duties on top of that. Working together to safeguard children is the government's statutory guidance on interagency working around keeping children safe. So there's a little bit in there about allegations and our role. There's also Berkshire, well, all of the Berkshire authorities have a Safeguarding Children's Partnership, which is a multi-agency group that looks at keeping children safe in our areas, and they publish child protection procedures online, and they also have good information in there if you do ever deal with anything of a safeguarding nature. This is some new guidance, the next one. It's the government's brought out some statutory guidance for clubs, community activities, private tutors, that sort of thing, to give you advice and guidance about how to keep your children and young people safe. So in addition to things like the Child Protection in Sports Unit, that is a really good place to go if you want to sort of check that you're doing the right things in terms of safeguarding. It's very practical, that one. Next one, please, Callum. So if you're thinking about an allegation, we are talking about people who work with children. So a lot of social workers and children's services, they deal with children where they're at risk of abuse or harm from the people who look after them, their parents or carers. The LADO looks at children who might be at risk of harm or have suffered harm from somebody who's in a position of trust. So sports coaches, the clergy, teachers, social workers, youth workers, anyone who's working with children and may or may not have harmed a child. That's when I get involved. So it's also if anybody might have committed a criminal offence against a child, then the LADO needs to get involved. We have to think also about what we call transferable risk. So if you've got someone's arrested for indecent possession of indecent images of children and they're a Scouts leader, then we have to think about them as someone who might pose a risk of harm to children. So that's when the LADO should also be involved in those cases. And the whole idea of it really is we want to prevent anybody who is not safe and suitable to be working with children to be a part of the children's workforce or volunteer force. We want to make sure that the right people get involved, and if they're not suitable, that we can remove them from that place. So a lot of this came from, if you cast your minds back some years ago, there was that awful case in Soham where 2 girls were murdered by somebody who was a caretaker of a school. So Ian Huntley. So a lot of our safeguarding work around people, things like DBS checks and all of those sorts of things, safer recruitment, all of that's come out of a situation where the worst thing possible happened to children from somebody who was supposed to be in a position of trust, someone they could trust and not be afraid of. So this is where all of this has come from. We really want to make sure that children don't get harmed by the people who are working with them. Next slide, please. So when we're thinking about harm, well, what does that mean? I mean, this is just some examples, but there's physical harm with hitting, kicking, punching, pulling. I think what I've done, if you see there's a link at the bottom when this gets sent out, there's a link there to sort of talk about abuse in sports and what physical abuse might look like in a sporting event as well. A bit more detail there. Sexual harm, that could be anything from sexual abuse, physical acts of sexual abuse, down to grooming, or forcing a child, enticing a child to watch indecent material. So it could cover a whole range of things. Emotional harm, and I think that's quite relevant. You've mentioned the White Review, which looked at sort of coaching, etc., in gymnastics, and a lot of what came out of that was psychological and verbal harm that happened. And neglect also can result in sort of that failing to protect from harm, not having the right arrangements that keep children safe. So that's the sort of harm that we're looking at. Next one, please, Callum. So this is just a reminder that allegations can also happen in people's private lives. So that how you behave in your personal life might have implications if you are a coach or if you are a volunteer in the sports clubs working with children. If you're arrested for assault, or if there's some sort of concern in your private life, that could have implications, because we need to think about transferable risk, and whether the way that somebody's behaved in their private life might affect their work with children. So as a club welfare officer, you might become aware of something like that with anyone who's working in your club. And as was said, you need to let your safeguarding team at the national governing body know if you have one. If you're part of a national governing body, you need to let them know. Sometimes it's risk by association as well. It may be that you're, you become aware that somebody who's
Apologies, we seem to have lost Fiona.
I'm back. I'm back.
I'm
so sorry. I think it's when a bird flies past or something and does something to my internet. So I was just saying that it might be risk by association by someone who is living with or is in the same household, who might pose a risk of harm to children. So we have to think quite broadly. Next slide, please. Finally, on the role of the LADO. So working together, the guidance I mentioned earlier and the Children's Act make it clear that every local authority needs to have an officer, or if larger authorities have a group of officers who will receive reports about allegations and be involved in the management and oversight of individual cases. So like that was said earlier, if you have a case where there's an allegation that somebody in your club has hurt a child, somebody who works with children, that will get reported to your safeguarding team, the national governing body. They will then contact the LADO to get advice about how to progress with that. So sometimes, depending on the nature of the allegation, it might be quite serious, and there may need to be other agencies involved. I've put Ofsted in there, that's more relevant for others. But for instance, if there's a crime, maybe an assault or a sexual assault of some description, the police would need to be involved because they would have a role to investigate potential crime. Children's services might need to be involved to safeguard children as well. So as a LADO, I would contact them and involve them in that process if necessary. We also, the LADO also needs to check that cases are dealt with as quickly as possible. We don't want anybody subject to an allegation for any length of time if they don't need to be, but it has to be consistent with a fair and thorough process to make sure children are safe, but also that adults who work with children are treated fairly and are supported as well. And if necessary, we give advice about referring on to the disclosure and barring service if there's an ongoing concern. Next slide, please. So every organisation that works with children should have a procedure for managing allegations. It should be part of your safeguarding policy for allegations against people who work or volunteer with children needs to be consistent with the guidance and with the safeguarding procedures, and be very clear about how allegations should be recorded and who they should be reported to. So if you're not sure, you might want to go back and have a look at your organisation's policy and procedure. If it doesn't mention allegations, or if there's not any guidance there, you might want to consult with your governing body, or perhaps with your sports welfare officer can point you in the right direction on having that in place. And every organisation should have a designated manager responsible for receiving all allegations and ensuring these are responded to quickly and correctly. So again, it may be that your role as a club welfare officer is making sure that you get the information if somebody's raised a concern or made an allegation, and that you submit that to your national governing body safeguarding team as soon as possible, so that they can take any action that's needed as a result. Next slide, please. So just some general tips on if there is an allegation, don't panic. It is something that is really upsetting for everybody involved, but what I would suggest is that make a detailed record of everything that you know. So if somebody's told you face to face, make notes of what they've said, who said it, what time this was, what date this was. What I would say is don't go ahead and investigate. Don't go and ask everybody who was there. If maybe that's an allegation that a coach hit a child during a coaching session, don't go and interview everybody and investigate, just in case there does need to be an investigation by another agency. But do make a note of everything that's been said, write it down, and share that information with the national governing body safeguarding team as soon as possible, if you have one. I'm just assuming that most people on the call are part of organisations that are affiliated with the national governing body. If not, then obviously you can seek advice from your welfare officers, but anyone can come straight to the LADO as well. If you're not able to access your national governing body and their safeguarding team, you can come straight to the LADO as a club welfare officer and ask for advice. We also need to make sure that if there is an allegation of physical abuse or sexual abuse of a child, children's services need to be notified, and also the police need to be notified. But I would say go through your safeguarding team first, or contact the LADO to make sure it gets reported to the right place. Next one, please. So when the LADO is notified about an allegation, say it comes from your safeguarding national governing body safeguarding officer, we will then have a conversation about what information we know, what information we still need, and how this allegation should be investigated. If necessary, I'll get children's services and the police to be involved. And sometimes if the allegation is very serious, we would have a meeting on Teams with the LADO, the safeguarding officer, the police if applicable, and children's services, to share information and make sure that we are coordinating any investigations that happen. Next slide, please. So yeah, if a case, an allegation is serious, for instance, that a child, somebody working with a child has sexually abused a child, there may be a number of different investigations. You've got your child protection inquiries and assessment of children's needs, the criminal investigation by police, and disciplinary or other investigations or actions that need to be taken by the national governing body or the sports organisation itself, your club. So when it gets like that, when it is very serious, we have those meetings to plan and make sure that we're doing the right thing at the right time and things are investigated properly. Next slide. So we absolutely, as a LADO, we always make sure that we exercise a duty of care to anyone who's subject to an allegation. So if the person working in your club, they will be, they need to be signposted to welfare and support services. So if it's really devastating if you have an allegation made against you. It's hugely upsetting. Whether it's true or not, either way, it is really difficult to manage that. So we would always check that somebody is signposted to their GP, their welfare service, any kind of, sometimes larger organisations have their own occupational health or welfare services, but if not, we would signpost them to their doctor and other support services. Any professional advice or legal advice, sometimes we would point them in that direction as well, and we would just make sure that the national governing body or whoever's in charge of the internal investigation or the sports organisation investigation keeps in touch with that person, keeps them up to date, make sure that they know what's happening. So we really want to be treating them fairly and supporting them through the process. And the next slide, please. We also have a duty of care to the child or children who might have been subject to an allegation. So we want to take care of their immediate safeguarding needs. That's why sometimes you need to contact children's services to get advice about how to keep children safe. Parents should also be informed that an allegation's been made, but we would usually say to consult with the LADO about how parents are informed and when and what information can be shared. They have a right to know that there's been an allegation and that it's going to be investigated, but they don't have the right to know any confidential or private information about the subject, the adult who's alleged to have harmed the child. So we consider social care or early help assessments for the children as well. Next slide, please. So when there is an investigation into an allegation against somebody working in a position of trust, we always aim to reach an outcome. That investigation, we want it to be concluded. For instance, if it's a police investigation, it'll either result in no further action, but sometimes a caution, sometimes a court case, not guilty, guilty, conviction. So any allegation where there is sufficient evidence to prove the allegation will be recorded as substantiated. And in a criminal investigation, police have to provide evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that they believe is proves that somebody has done something. Whereas we are looking at on the balance of probabilities, is it more likely or less likely to harm this child? Where there's insufficient evidence to prove or disprove the allegation, the result is unsubstantiated. Unfounded means there's no evidence or proper basis that supports the allegation. It often means that somebody might have been mistaken by what they saw, or a child or young person's misinterpreted somebody's actions. Sometimes we get false and malicious allegations, but they're actually very rare. That's where we have evidence to prove that it didn't happen. So, but just to let you know, that's what the outcomes that we're looking for. Next slide. Yeah, probably you've already mentioned this, but why safeguarding matters, and just going back to allegations are less likely to happen if safeguarding is embedded in everything that you do in your organisation. If you've not seen things like Football's Darkest Secret, and BBC released in 2021, which is a documentary into prolific and long-standing abuse in football. We've already mentioned the White Review, Athlete A, talking about gymnastics. And I know this isn't sports, but Jimmy Savile was a situation that shocked the nation, really, in terms of what he got away with. When it makes us have to think the unthinkable. None of us like to think that anybody we work with or volunteer with in a sports club would harm children, but it does happen even in the safest organisations. So it's just here to underscore, use your welfare officer. We're really pleased as LADOs that this role has come into play to provide you all with the support and guidance and signposting, doing what can be quite a tricky job, I think, in your role. And when in doubt, use those resources, contact your safeguarding team for advice. If you are not part of a national governing body, you can contact the LADO if you think that there's been a harm to a child or risk of harm. Don't feel like you have to do it alone. Get that advice and guidance. I think that might be the last one. Is that the last one? Oh yeah, sorry, best practice tips. Your code of conduct is absolutely key. Have a really good code of conduct so that everybody in your club knows what they need to do, what good behavior is, what positive behavior is, and also what's not acceptable. That goes for your coaches, for volunteers, children and parents. They all should be aware. Your codes of conduct for coaches and for staff and volunteers should be really clear about professional boundaries. That's about making sure that they're behaving in a professional way and not overstepping those lines and being overly friendly with children. Be careful how you use touch. I know that's really difficult. Sometimes in sports organisations, touch is used as part of your instruction, but it should all be in your policies and procedures, so parents and children know exactly what to expect, and they know what good physical instruction looks like and what's unsafe. Be really clear about what methods are okay in coaching. Safeguarding embedded, as you've said already, from top to bottom and championed in your organisation, and not just an add-on or a tick box. And really give your volunteers, your coaches, everybody in your organisation really good training and mentoring so they know they're supported, they know how to practice safely in your organisation. Next one. I think that might be it. That is it. Sorry.
That's all of your slides. No worries.
So it's a lot to take
Fiona.
on board. Sorry about that.
No, that's quite all right. Thank you very much for that. No questions have come through, so but if anyone does have any questions, do please pop them in the chat now. We have a hand up. Grace, if I just unmute you, then hopefully you should be able to speak. You might have to unmute yourself, Grace, I think.
Hi. Yeah, so when you're looking at transferable risk,
yep,
how much does it differ? Because I'm used to doing sort of assessments for, like, luckily in my club at the moment we don't have anyone who's got any criminal record whatsoever, but I have done risk assessments for staff for vulnerable adults.
Yep.
So, like, what would you say the main differences are in terms of transferable risks that would maybe get away with in adults but not in children? So I'm thinking like things like speeding, or like they got caught with cannabis 20 years ago, or like if things like that come up, you know, those kind of ones where in other circumstances you would risk assess it. What would you say the guidance is around that?
Well, in my experience, Grace, it's very similar actually. You'd look at the things like we mentioned use cannabis 20 years ago, and I know you'll get those interesting disclosures that come through. In those cases, I'd do exactly the same thing. I would meet with that person and understand the nature of that offence. So if it's something, maybe they've had a bit of a wild teenagerhood and they've calmed down since and they've not engaged in any worrying behaviour since. It all depends on the role as well. So if as part of your club's activities, you've got transport, you've got a club van or something, a bus, and you've got somebody who was arrested for drink driving, then it's very relevant to their role, and the risk assessment would be quite key. But if there's no driving involved, then I'm not sure that if they had a drink driving offence, it necessarily relates. So it is about looking at what are they going to be doing in your organisation, and you know what impact might their whatever offending history or information that you've got about their personal life, how might that affect? And if you, I've got a couple of example templates that I can send out. They're mostly for schools, I would say, but they walk you through how to do that transferable risk assessment. But it sounds like you do quite a few of them, Grace, but there is that there to sort of help you weigh up whether something's a risk now or not. I'm thinking about the most obvious one for children that may not be relevant for adults is any kind of indecent images of children. So if somebody's got an arrest or is on the sex offenders register for any sexual interest in children, that's a big red flag, obviously. That may not be such an issue for adults, but you never know. But it's the most obvious one I can think of for that would be more of a worry for children.
Yeah. Yeah, the thing, the driving one's interesting because we don't drive people. Yeah, the ones I've done in the past are for people who wouldn't drive people around, but I can see someone getting left at a club or something, and just some situation arising where an adult ends up driving a child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's difficult. It's really difficult. Sometimes you want to think if they've had a few DUIs or whatever they're called here, but over the in recent years, you do have to wonder, does that mean that they have a problem with problematic alcohol use as well? Because that could be an issue. So it's always difficult, but do get advice. These things, you should never have to make these decisions on your own, or talk it through with somebody, so that you can feel confident that you've getting the right approach, the balanced approach.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. No more questions have come through, so I can now move on. I'll just very quickly, before we do, if anyone hasn't introduced themselves in the chat with their club or organisation and the county they're on, could you please just do that now so we can keep track of everyone? I will now hand over to Heidi, who will go over some information for you for your clubs.
Thanks, Callum, and thank you, Fiona, as well, for that great overview of the Lado. We felt that it was quite an important thing just to bring into the forum this evening, just purely because from sports sector, it's not possibly a service that you've been made aware of. The Lado, and I'm sure Fiona will agree to this, has got typical connections with education, that sort of things, just purely because education is so regulated. But part of the work that we want to do within our role as well is to create that link between sport and the local authorities and the services that they provide as well. So whilst you'll still be required to follow your safeguarding procedures as per your national governing body, there is this support network out there as well. So again, just as Callum alluded to at the start, we want to make sure that you don't feel that you're on your own, and there is that advice service there. I suppose the only caveat to that would be is that the Lado is there for child services as opposed to adult. But then, you might have an adult who had trauma as a child, for example. So it's still a conversation that we can have, and it's still a support service that's out there. So yeah, we just felt that it was really important to bring that service in. And with respect to Oxfordshire, we do have a Lado based at the Oxford County Council, who I am in contact with. So if you're an Oxfordshire-based club and you want more information about that, then please feel free to get in contact with me. And similarly with Yvette, within the Bucks, and I know you said Berkshire there, Bucks and Milton Keynes districts. Fantastic. Okay, so we just wanted to offer you a bit more practical advice regarding your sports club, and also some more information around your national governing bodies. So this is just, it's a bit of practical information, as I mentioned, and we're going to just lead on to some training opportunities as well that we can offer you. So with regards to your national governing bodies, so as a club welfare officer, most of us are volunteers, and therefore knowing what we need to do as part of our role can be quite overwhelming sometimes. There's quite a lot of information in regards to what your national governing body does require. And this is sort of an ongoing and changing scenario as well. So with the introduction of our role, it has also made national governing bodies take a look at what their minimum standards are. So a lot of you may have noticed within your sports in the last 12 months that new checks and procedures have come into play, which again may feel a little overwhelming as a volunteer when you don't do this as your day job. So we are there as your contact if you do need to run anything by us, and we can liaise with the regional contact at the national governing body to hopefully answer any questions. And that has come out of the previous forum that we ran in June, where we've managed to sort of answer questions and just clarify a few things. So how adverse are you to knowing what your training and what your requirements are? Have you got that contact with your national governing body, or do you need us to help link you in with that and work with you on that? So as I mentioned, feel free to reach out to us and we can help you with any questions on that. Then it comes to safeguarding and within your actual club setting. So again, within the role that we've been doing, so I've been in post for the last 9 months, and one of the things I did when I first came into post was sort of take a look at what our clubs in my county offer in terms of communications on their websites. So I appreciate not every club even has a website. You might be in a very small club, so you might have a Facebook page, for example, but it's still having that outward communication so that your members know what is required of them, and who they can contact if they do want to report a concern. So have you recently reviewed your policies? Have you checked what your code of conducts are? If you were a new member and you went onto your website, is it obvious who you would need to contact if you wanted to report a concern, or even obvious who your welfare officer is? And we also say to check, that your contact details are up to date, and what kind of communications do you have? Is it an email address? And is that email address a generic email address as opposed to a personal email address? It might be very easy just to set yourself up with your personal email address to be that point of contact. But as a club welfare officer, it's quite likely that you're not going to be in the role for many, many years. And as people come and go, do you want to be contacted about a concern further down the line because somebody's got your contact details, even though you're not in that position any longer? So having that generic club email address is always a really good idea to start with. And then also in terms of your actual qualifications, so if you've done any extra accreditations as part of your welfare officer role, put that information upon your website, let your members know what you have got, as opposed to, just your standard DBS and checks that your NGB has asked you to do. If you've kind of gone above and beyond to do some further education, then it's always nice to show your members that you've gone to those lengths to do that. And in terms of your actual club welfare officer role, again, depending on the size of your club and what kind of setup you have in terms of your committee. Some clubs, your club welfare officer might sit on your committee and therefore be more of an integral part in terms of the goings on and the decisions that are made. Or you might be sort of more sat on the periphery. And we always say that safeguarding is everybody's role, although as a club welfare officer, it is deemed as you're the point of contact, but that's not to say that your chairman, your president, your secretary, they all have a responsibility for safeguarding within your club as well. So if you do have the opportunity to kind of help with the work to make it less stressful for you, because we appreciate the role can be quite emotive depending on what concerns you come across, can be quite triggering as well. If you have the support of somebody else within your club, so either a deputy to help support you to share that responsibility, or if you're lucky enough to have several members that want to take on that role as well. So again, it just sort of helps share that workload mentally as well as emotionally. And it might also enable you to expand on what you can offer your members in terms of connections and sessions. So I like to give an example of a local club in my area where they've got several welfare officers that, extremely lucky to be in that position, but it has enabled them to offer a drop-in session to their members once a month. So it's just before their run session, but it just gives people that sort of safe space regularly to be able to pop in and have a conversation. And it might not be reporting a concern about a member of the club. It might just be offloading about some concerns that they've got in their private life as well, because as a club welfare officer, you might be in a position to signpost that person to that help and support outside of their club. Next slide. And okay, so moving on to training opportunities. So these are some opportunities that we can offer as sport welfare officers, but also we can signpost you to these organisations. And some of them you might be aware of, you might have come across as part of your national governing body affiliation training requirements. For example, UK Coaching tends to offer most of your generic safeguarding training, your paid for training. If you're looking for some free resources, there are some really great ones here for your adult safeguarding. So that's the Ancraft Trust in the top right-hand corner. They've got podcasts, they've got resources. It's actually Adult Safeguarding Week in November, so there'll be a big push on information there if you're interested in some free resources. Bottom right, you've got your Child Protection in Sport unit. So they're connected to the NSPCC. So again, similar to the Ancraft Trust, they're your free go-to resource organisation, and again they have their Child Protection in Sport Week coming up in October. The NWG is the National Working Group. Again, another free resource. They're predominantly funded by Sport England, and they've got the ability to offer some really good bystander awareness training. So depending on the nature of your sport, if you're one that's in a venue like football or rugby, for example, and having that training regarding bystanders, so sort of education on how to approach, how to intervene, that kind of thing, then we will be running some sessions of those, hopefully in the coming new year. So if you're interested in that area, then please feel free to reach out to us. And again, that's all free. And then just at the bottom there, there's the abuse awareness in sport. So that's something that I can actually offer. And we also look at the trauma-informed coaching side of that as well. So it's more about that awareness of how we're working with children and young people, or people that might have experienced trauma, and just the language and the environments that we're offering to our members or to our children. So again, it's all free, all this training. And if it is something that's of interest to you, then please feel free to reach out to us. And just on this next slide here, so this is just the links to those particular websites. All this information will be on the slides, which we'll send out to you. But again, as I say, if any of those are of interest to you, then please drop me a line, or Yvette or Callum. And that's it from my section. So we are going to open it up to any questions. I know we've had a few questions already for Fiona, but if anyone's got any questions in general about the topics that we've covered, or the work that we've covered, or any training going forward, then please feel free to speak now or pop it in the chat.